Welcome to Paper Cuts and Plot Twists, where the paper is dangerous and the plots are twisted.
Paper cuts, what's the risk? Just another day in the life, just another plot twist. But is it a tragedy, a comedy, romantasy, just another fantasy? It's paper cuts and plot twists. The rest we'll wait and see.
I can't believe we are actually at episode 7. It took me years, or at least a year and a half, that I'd been thinking about a podcast, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And not to say I didn't know what I wanted to do broadly, I didn't know topically. How do you carry on so many episodes? And what do you say in each one? And now that we've been in it for 7 episodes, how did we get here? For instance, it was like a surprise to me that we did Moral Dilemma in episode 1, but it really fit because I knew what I wanted to talk about, and it wrapped itself around the story. And I knew what I wanted to talk about within the story and why Moral Dilemma was interesting to me and how it works in characters and why we're kind of attached to these thematics in stories. But the one that really surprised me out of all the episodes as I was writing them down, I was talking to my friend, actually Christina Blaze, who was in episode 2. And I think I had asked her, I was like, hey, would you want to do this? And she's like, no, I really want to do fantasy. Okay, we'll do fantasy. And it was kind of already there, but the fact that she was just like, I have a lot to say about this. And then we just started thinking through it. What does that look like? And I loved that she pushed back on that. I love that she's like, no, this is really interesting to me. I learned something about her in that, and I learned something about myself. And I dove into this world of fantasy. I've read fantasy. I know it. I know Lord of the Rings. I know Harry Potter. I know all of these stories. I know Chronicles of Narnia. You name it. I'm not saying that I go out there and just read all fantasy. I don't. But I have my favorites, and I love them, and I love their movies. You name it, I'm for it. Especially my favorites. I'll read those again and again and again because they're just good, and they're good every time I read them. So I loved fantasy, but when she pushed back on that and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. And then we started to dive into it and we started to plan it. And I was like, I love fantasy even more now. And here's the thing, I never imagined myself writing fantasy, but after that episode, I was like, I would try this. Because she even encouraged that. She's like, yeah, I would totally read fantasy. And I'm like, and who doesn't want to write for the reader, right? Like, so if somebody says they want to read that, then you're like thinking of all the ideas, like, how could I, make this story or whatever? And that's a lot of what this is. I love stories. Why I'm doing this podcast, I love stories. I love what they tell us, what they teach us. Today we're kind of in a strange episode. We find ourselves lost in translation. And this is where communication goes awry. This is where we don't get it. We feel out of place, a fish out of water, a bird out of sky, I guess. We're struggling to understand something. We're not in our context. We're lost. And if you've traveled anywhere outside of where you grew up, I suppose, it really doesn't matter how far you've traveled. Just go a little bit further beyond your comfort zone. Go into the next town, go into the next state, the next city, the next country, overseas, different languages. And you really start to understand what it's like to be lost in translation. The first time the first time I was on a plane, I went to California. I loved it. I did not feel lost in translation, not really. We were in the LA area, it was great. But yet there was also the nervousness of when you travel, you're a little off step, you're trying to figure out your way in a very light form. You know what to expect, you can plan for things. And so I didn't feel lost in translation. The first time I went out of country was to Paris. That was the first time I went overseas. And I went to 2 places. I went to Paris first, and then I went to see a friend in Germany. And things I was told about Parisians weren't true, except that they were. And how do you want to explain that, Stephanie? Explain what you mean, because don't let your audience be lost in translation of what you're trying to say, right? So to explain this, maybe you've heard this before, the French. 2 Americans are rude and unfriendly. And I remember studying the language and hearing about Alliance Française, the protection of the language. The French were very particular on preserving grammatical language of French, the spoken language of French. Like with the upcoming technological advances at that time, email, for instance, the French were creating, it wasn't a far stretch, but they were creating very French words. Instead of just saying email, which was the short form, it was their words in French for the same thing. They weren't going to use modernized language, even if it was universal. They were going to still make it French. They wanted to keep that culture. I really respected that, honestly. And when I went there, I'd also heard, okay, they don't like Americans, or they're like rude, or they're standoffish. They're not. I'll tell you, I did not have that experience at all. But I had a professor and a high school teacher who gave me a little insight into culture. And some of the things they said really resonated with me, which is one, try. You're in their country, it's their home. Try the language. I had studied French in high school. Definitely not going to be high marks. I know everything about French. I barely could, I didn't have a lot of practice hearing people in the language. So I often didn't know what people were saying. And sometimes they were saying really nice things and I still didn't know. And then they would translate it for me. And then there was the other side, and I had it in college, and still, like, our teacher was better at getting us to understand and hear the words. But the thing that I picked up on culture is very much respect and try with the language first and foremost. Don't presume that they're going to know English. Most of them do, but don't presume it. And a big one, maybe surprisingly the biggest one, but like learning about the culture and how the language worked within the culture was so important. For instance, I go into a store, I say bonjour to whoever is in the store. They may own that store. It's like you're going into their house. You respect them. You understand that they are not just serving you to serve you. This is their home. You're a guest in your home. They want you to be there. It's not that they don't want you to be there, but there's just a certain politeness and courteousness. So, from a cultural perspective, I understood this because my teacher said this. And that made a big difference on my experience of being in Paris. A huge difference. I did not find the rumors of the French to be true. They were courteous. They were kind. They said nice things. I saw the grifters, of course. They're all over Paris, like the lady with the doll baby that she hides and tries to get money. It's not a real baby, but she's just trying to grift you some money on one of the bridges. Or the guy who won't let you go because he's going to draw your face at the Tuileries, or what. So there's a lot of that, and especially in the tourist locations, you got more of that. In one of the cities, and we went to a restaurant, you could just tell that they serve tourists all day long. Now, the difference about experience and being lost in translation, and the why I'm talking about this is because I bought the book of Luke, the biblical book of Luke. I wanted the language, and because I was reading this in English, and I just wanted to hold. This is something like, especially if you go to Notre Dame and you're standing in front of this grand cathedral and how that's shaped the culture. It was kind of important to me to see how the language worked in something that I was familiar with and how they understood it. And I thought that was really important because it was something where we had a shared understanding to some degree. We're agreeing that, okay, this same book, we both have it, but how our language is represented is different. The French I find to be a lot more friendly or welcoming than maybe was presented to me before I went. And that made a big difference in the language. And I would love to share more. But before I do, we're going to take a brief pause. And my friend Danika is going to share about her upcoming novel, a vampire novella called Bullet, and her IndieGogo campaign that she's running right now, that you can support her and the work that she's doing to get her book out there in the world. And so she's looking for people that are going to partner with her and come alongside her in this journey. And you can go to IndieGogo.com and look up a vampire novella, Bullet. I'll have more details on our Spotify, so you can go right to the link and find her. And she would love to have your support. And there's lots of great opportunities and things that you get along with supporting her. And so please check her out at IndieGogo.com. And with that, here's Danika.
What would you sacrifice for your greatest desire?
Bullet is told through a vampire's perspective who was once a girl turned under duress on her 16th birthday. Everything changed in 1924. She yearns for what she can never have, her humanity. To cope, she lives vicariously, glimpsing strangers' lives that might have once been hers. In 2008, she meets a teenage girl, the perfect window into the human experience. The girl has a family who adores and protects her. Still blissfully naive, she's privileged to enjoy life's little moments unburdened by guilt, grief, and utter defeat. But, by mistake, this girl discovers the secret. Since she craves independence, eternal youth, and belonging, now her paramount aspiration is to become a vampire. The vampire questions whether her human experience window has been tainted by this revelation, as the girl doesn't realize the gift of eternal life comes with a curse. You never feel alive. What would it take for one to convince the other? Can either be satisfied with their individual nature? Will their friendship ever be sincere with this dark cloud looming over them both?
Thanks, Danika, for that. Honestly, I can't wait to read it. And with that, we're back. I found the French to be a lot friendlier and more welcoming, and I really wanted to understand the language. I studied the language. I didn't want to be lost in translation, but I saw many fellow Americans who were. I remember going to the Louvre. Du billet, s'il vous plaît. 2 tickets, please. Or Bonjour, vous parlez anglais? It was vous parlez because I would have done the formal you form. And sometimes they would say oui. So I would say, can I have 2 tickets, please? Or at the Louvre, I remember saying bonjour first, always with greeting. And I practiced it well so that my enunciations were clean and not Americanized. That was important to me. It also failed me on a couple of experiences, especially at a cafe where I had practiced so well. Je voudrais une salade, s'il vous plaît. I wanted a salad, please. And actually, it's not even as good now as it was back then. And to have the French waiter share a long diatribe of whatever was on his mind, the passion, and it was so beautiful. And I stared at him and I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I was lost in translation. Okay, back to the Louvre. So, say bonjour, I would like 2 tickets, please. And she'd give the ticket. And a lot of times, so the other part was, do you speak English? That would be something in a situation where if we were in a place and I knew that what I had understood, my rudimentary French at this time, very untested, this is real world experience, people. So like this is it. You're on deck. You're on stage and everybody's looking at you and you didn't know what to say next. You only learned that first line. You only know how to order food. And so your default at that point is, do you speak English? May I speak English with you? So I had to learn some transitional phrases that would allow them to say yes or no. And if they couldn't, I would do my best. So that part of it, even if they told you no, they would understand that your French isn't great and that you're going to try to the best of your ability to speak it, even though, because you want to be able to communicate with them, even though they don't speak English and you don't speak French well enough to communicate, you're going to try your darndest to make sure you get it across. So asking them permission to, can we speak in English or do you speak in English? Would this be okay? And if they say yes, great. And then they will try and you will try together. Together, you're sharing in the conversation. If not, then, you do the best in French that you can, and they're going to be a lot more pleasant with you. And that's why I had a great experience. That's why I didn't find the French to be cold. I found them very expressive and thoughtful and kind, and actually practically kind too. And I'll get to that. So here's so I'm working in the language and we're at the Louvre and the lady's giving us the tickets. In another line, getting tickets for a family of like 4 are the Americans. If I were to guess by accent, at the time I think my husband and I both said Texas. We thought Texas. I'm not saying anything about Texas. Dude, you people are great. I have no problem with Texas at all. But just from accent alone, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's what I guessed. Because they were loud, very loud, almost loud like I'm being right now, expressive and loud. They were loud. They were American. And that was the clearest. That was ringing like the bells on Notre Dame. Like it was clear they were not from Paris and they weren't trying. I heard most of their conversation. You couldn't avoid it. And they came right up and they were just asking for what they wanted. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? You know what? The people at the Louvre, they know they're dealing with tourists all day. But again, you're in their house. This is a cultural thing. And all of us that are traveling are a little bit lost in translation because we're coming to their house. And you want to know something about when you're a guest in somebody's house, you kind of want to know, what should I bring? Should I bring, some bread and some wine, or bread and some olive oil, and like share, a hostess gift? Like, how do I approach them? They have invited me. They're allowing me to be here. Let me understand something about them so that we'll have a good time, and I want to be a good guest. And a host wants to be a good host, so you're giving them permission to be a good host, right? So the French care about those things. That's a cultural thing. That's something that needs to be understood. And again, I see now why the French have the reputation that they may have. But I have to say, it may be to the guilt of those who didn't understand whose house they were in and the language of the people. Because the language doesn't just matter of them to the American, or them to whoever the tourist is. I'm just using because I'm from America. That's the context I got. I don't know what it's like if you come from other countries into Paris, and it's probably changed since I've gone there. But they're particular about language, not just from a foreigner to going to France perspective. They care about language even for their own people. Like they preserve the language. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I recorded a whole section in my car about language and the breakdown. And before I get to that, I just want to say, like, I love traveling, and the place that I felt the least comfortable and most lost in translation was in Great Britain. It was in London. I loved London. It was fantastic. It was such a great trip. It was so beautiful, it was so historical, but there was a cultural misstep. It didn't We speak the same language, but I felt lost because there was other things behind the words I didn't understand. There was a culture there. Our British cousins we share history and language, and there's so many people that have been Anglophiles, and we study their literature, and I've read the books, like I know a lot, even about, not to the degree that they may know about America, but I know a lot about British history and literary history, and yet I still felt out of step. It was a strange feeling. They have a king, and a king currently, but at the time they had a queen. They have royalty, and they have such an old, rich history. Um, I was in Oxford at The Eagle and Child, The Bird and Baby, where Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and the Inklings sat and they met, and I looked upon the spot that they were. And it was really sweet as a young woman saw that we were there, and she's like, "Can I take a picture in front?" She's like, "Who are you excited to see about the Inklings?" Or like, "What was your connection?" And she thought it was Tolkien because Lord of the Rings wasn't, well, it was a while ago, but it was like that's probably where a lot of people were coming because of Tolkien. And I was like, "C.S. Lewis." And she was surprised by that, because I think a lot of people hadn't, don't go there because of C.S. Lewis, or at least maybe that she would know. And it was so nice that she had done that for us, and that she, took that time, and people were friendly and really nice. It was more about me. It was more about how I felt in the situation. I felt out of step because it felt unfamiliar with all of its familiarity. It didn't it was like trying to figure out, how do you live in this space? It's like being not feeling comfortable in your body. That's kind of how it felt. And also there was all that nervous excitement of seeing these beautiful things, like going to the Tate Modern and seeing a water house. I had tears in my eyes looking at the Lady of Shalott, which is this massive painting by Waterhouse, and it's gorgeous. And I'm in tears because it's so beautiful. And history is reaching back at me, and I'm connecting with it. And yet, as I walked around, I think I realized, wow, there's a lot I don't know about people's lives day in and day out. I felt in this instance truly a tourist, going from museum to museum. There was culture and history that I had read about, and I didn't know how it fit or how it felt. And that was a strange moment of being lost in translation. So, from all the stories that I've read and all of the things, I bring up Britain lastly before we go into the diatribe of language and the breakdown of that, which I recorded in my car. So you're welcome. You may hear a car a loud engine in the background. I tried to clean it up as best I could, but, I also like it a little bit gritty just for your entertainment so you can kinda know that real life is happening around me. But I bring up England because I think I share some commonality with our very good friend, Charles Dickens, who wrote American Notes and Pictures from Italy. His depiction of America, they were boisterous, they were loud, and he got a lot of flack for the book because he was critical. Because I think he felt lost in translation coming to America. He probably assumed, like me, hey, we all speak the same language, but our attitudes are different. The type of country we are actually really does matter. Being British is different than being American. And you may share a language, but there's something on a cultural side that doesn't translate. And that's where I think it comes down to. You'll understand why in just a minute as we go, where I break down a little bit of the language, and I would love to share that with you. But there's a lot that goes into how we get lost. And all of it is surrounded by trying to communicate something, trying to understand one another. And we could do a lot more in society with this. But before I go into that and before we wrap up, we still have I'll share a little bit more in my car recording. And then also, I want to introduce my friend Chris. I'll share a little bit more about him, and he's going to be sharing about his Lost in Translation. I think you're really going to love that. So stick around for that too. So, next up, I want to share my car thoughts. And it's a little bit about a poem that I was writing and how that looks like when it comes down to communicating ideas, metaphors, and similes, and just the language itself, how it breaks down and communicates. I wrote a poem today about dance. What's interesting is the poem is really talking about how we give over our right to decide things for ourselves. We look to follow somebody. We're looking for a leader. We want somebody to think for us. And the ending line is, in the count of three, we dance in the streets. What seems obvious on the surface is it's timed like it could be a song or it could lead to dancing. And in one sense, it seems lighthearted. But the reason I wrote it and the way I shaped it in my mind, or the thoughts that inspired it, were actually more about giving up our autonomy and our ability to think through and trust ourselves. We're just like looking for somebody to tell us something. We're looking for somebody to follow, somebody who's got wisdom greater than us. It has a lot to do with trust. Anyways. In writing this poem, I realized as one reads it, they're not reading my thoughts behind it. Something's lost in translation. Something of what I was describing is lost in translation. And yet, the words are there. The influence of it, like you could read it this other way. And a lot of what we interpret and a lot of miscommunication comes from the fact that what may lead to the words of the surface, there's an undercurrent of thought behind it. How much more then if you're speaking another language? And in most cases, lots of things aren't translated, they're transliterated, meaning the words, the language, the alphabet, it's as if you were using cuneiform. It's a symbol, and that symbol isn't a direct sound or relation to what we use currently in the Phoenician alphabet. And so translation is more from the same alphabet, the same sounds, the same phonetic sounds, the same lettering, so Phoenician alphabet, all the languages that would use that alphabet and use the phonetical representation. You can translate those. So Latinate languages can be translated as a group because they're using the same alphabet. That's not true for other languages, even to like Russian or Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese. They're not using the same alphabet. They have their own form, their own representation in the language, and sometimes even phonetically. So you first have to transliterate it, and that just means you put it into the phonetic representation in your language, and then you interpret the symbol into the meaning, and then you try to get the understanding. But because of the way we use simile and metaphor in different languages, it doesn't always translate. The meaning doesn't always translate. So even for poetry is a really great example of like, I can write a poem with these ideas and I'm not telling you everything. And I'm creating this metaphor around dance, but it's not about the dance. It's about so much more than the dance. It's about autonomy and partnership. I never titled this poem, and I could easily title it Dance with the Devil. So like music, poetry, all of those things, it's fascinating to me because the translation, the understanding of something, the words are symbols. Language works on symbols. Meaning is something behind those things. Those symbols are an indicator. Grammar helps for that too, but even that has changed, and the morphologies of words and the history, the syntax, and all of those things have developed over time. And a lot of that is because you have an emerging language developed from the encountering of several languages together that come together and agree on certain forms. Most language developed because of the trades. When they would trade for something, they would have to come and agree on the symbol, the name of the thing they were paying for, and then the amount of the money. So the numbers were the same, like the count of numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, that part was similar, but the name of the thing that they were agreeing on. So you had to create a contract, as it were. So when you talk about Phoenician alphabet, it's not surprising that the Phoenicians themselves were traders. They would travel to all these countries and they developed a trade language, and it's that trade language that really develops the, at that time, considered the Western world. And translation, it's interesting that money drives a lot of that, and it still drives it today. And trade languages have been what has developed and expanded in the world, and that's where we are trying to find communication. And what gets lost in translation is sometimes the art, the culture, the beauty of expression with metaphor and simile, the understanding that goes deeper and philosophical, or is more philosophical to the person, like poetry, the arts, because there are a lot of things like love. Love as a symbol, we can draw a heart. We don't make it anatomical. If we drew a heart and said that equated to love, why is the heart? Is it because of the beat of the heart? But essentially, love is a symbol. It's a metaphor for something we feel, and it may take a lot of words to really explain what it means to me. And then that might be lost to you because you don't understand it. You've never experienced it that way. So you're trying to figure out how to understand it. Maybe you don't want to. And I think we live in an era where a lot of things are lost in translation. There's history that's lost in translation. There's culture that's lost in translation. We've lost a lot in translation. And part of this has to do with language, but even more importantly, it has to do with meaning. It has to do with understanding. It has to do with who you are in a time and place, and can you communicate that to someone else, that through a shared experience and understanding they can understand you. And the more we separate on that, the less we're able to understand each other, the more that we're eyes open in culture. And some things come back to how then, if we're lost in translation, how do we gain understanding? How do we find ourselves? And I think that's a really good question, where literature, storytelling, is a way that we build up cultural understanding and meaning for ourselves. It's a way where we find ourselves when we feel lost. And now I want to introduce you to my friend Chris at Positively Chris, who is not only a friend, but also a fellow podcaster. He has a podcast with B. Steele called Flashback Soundtrack. Also, Ignite the Light. You can find both on Spotify. He's got some great insight. We've been talking about this for a while now, and so I'm really excited that he was able to share his thoughts on Lost in Translation. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And after that, we'll be back to wrap it up for this episode, episode 7. So thanks, Chris, for being here. Can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Lost in translation usually means the sad moment when a beautiful idea gets mangled into nonsense between languages. But in Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, you don't even need a foreign tongue. You can be born and raised speaking English and still have no earthly idea what anyone is actually saying. Take Jack and Algernon, two charming disasters in polite society. On paper, they're having a conversation about love, family, marriage, death. In reality, they're basically flinging glitter at each other while the house burns down. Algernon kicks things off strong by calling his entire family, lovingly of course, a tedious pack of people who don't know how to live and don't have the smallest instinct about when to die. Now that's one way to ask Grandma about her will at Sunday brunch. Jack protests, Calling this nonsense, Algernon, ever helpful, insists that arguing is exactly what things were invented for, which frankly explains 90% of every Twitter debate today. Then, Jack worries aloud that Gwendolyn might someday turn into her mother, Lady Bracknell, a woman so terrifying she could make a tax auditor cry. Algernon reassures him in the most depressing way possible. Wait for Mother's Day now. From there, it's open season on cleverness itself. Jack complains that everybody is too clever nowadays, and he longs for the blessed return of actual fools. Algernon replies that the fools are still around. They're just talking about the clever people. In Wilde's world, wit isn't about communication, it's camouflage. When Algernon brings up Jack's fake double life, Jack claims, proudly, that truth just isn't something you tell a nice girl. Because obviously, honesty is terribly bad manners. Imagine ruining a perfectly good engagement with basic facts. Tragic. Jack then calmly plots how to kill off his fake brother Ernest. First, he suggests apoplexy. But Algernon, the real family values guy here, points out that apoplexy is hereditary, and you wouldn't want to taint your bloodline, even in fiction. So they settle on a severe chill, which thankfully is not considered genetic, at least by the rigorous standards of 19th century pseudoscience. Then they spiral into what to do after dinner. Theater? No, too much listening. Club? No, too much talking. Go to the Empire? No, too much looking around. So they decide to do nothing, because even nothing, when done properly, is exhausting. So let me tie this all together. In this 5-minute sprint of insults, fake deaths, and dinner plans, Jack and Algernon show that Wilde's real target isn't language, it's meaning itself. Words don't clarify, they confuse. Feelings don't emerge, they get translated into social performance, into cleverness, into pure polished nonsense. They're not just lost in translation, they're dancing in the wreckage. And Wilde is laughing all the way to the final curtain.
I want to thank my friends Danika and Chris, Positively Chris, for being here today and helping us out with the podcast. I really appreciate both of you. And if you could really support our friends out there, that would be awesome. I know Danica is looking forward to raising the money to get her book published, and she has a goal that you want to, if you want to go back out to the IndieGogo and support her, that would be awesome. Like I said, I'm going to put links for both Positively Chris's flashback soundtrack. I'm going to put that in the Spotify, and I'm going to put Danica's link as well. And I know that Danica is on a timeline. So if you're hearing this, today is Thursday, May 8th. I believe she has about a week where she's got some goals that she's set for herself and she really wants to meet those goals. So if you could help her out, that would be awesome. Thanks for being here. There's so much more I could say about Lost in Translation. And I want to say to my friend, Dad, he helped me learn Vietnamese, not the whole language, but he helped me with some of the language. And I had asked her, would your dad teach me this? And he's like, yeah, I'll help her. And so with that, Vietnamese is also using the Phoenician alphabet, but the diphthongs and the tonality is very different than what is used in Latin languages, though they share the Phoenician alphabet. And he was teaching me some words, but he taught me the alphabet song in Vietnamese. And I'm going to sing it for you now. My apologies to anybody that knows the language. This is the best I can do, and I'll tell you why it's important. A B C la ba chu do uva le chu ro o I ve kyon yon che hak cha chan kyan yon ye. That might have been terrible, incorrect. I'm sure it was all of those things. He quit on me because he just couldn't take my I I don't have a good vocal tonality for Vietnamese because I don't understand the diphthongs. A lot of vocal language is developed by the age of 2. Your mouth starts able to form those words and you grow up with it. I did not. And I'm not a poor student, but there were just some things that were very difficult to overcome in a short period of time, and I think his patience was waning. But that song I just sang for you, when he was teaching it to me, we sang it several times, and it was great because, my friend's mom was in the kitchen cooking. She's singing along with us, so the 3 of us are singing that song, and it's like something you teach a young child, and it was so precious. So the thing is it's a risk to go out there and put yourself out there and try to use words that you don't know and try to bridge the gap of understanding, and there's a lot more to overcome if you don't know the language. But it's important, and it's more important than we wanna be understood, but in wanting to be understood, there's a lot of understanding we need to do, and the best way to find yourself in translation is listening and bridging that gap and taking risks at actually understanding somebody and the attempt of learning somebody through culture. All words are metaphors, they're just stand ins for meaning. A word is a symbol, but that symbol represents meaning, and we can contextualize that over time. And I think it's important to be more open. I think we're in a world, I believe us being in a world today where we seem to thrive on misunderstanding, and very rarely are we coming to understanding and connection. And we need more of that, and listening and being a part of each other's life and trying to translate, I think it'll go a long way. So with that, I hope this is a little more clear. Maybe not. Maybe you're less lost than you were, I hope. If not, we'll try this again and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 8. I can't wait to see you there.